In this InspiredInsider.com interview, we talk with Colin Theriot. He's one of the titans of copywriting, and he founded the group CultofCopy. He talks about his formula for writing any message in a sincere way. He talks about the importance of storytelling and how he learned it from a young age. He even talks about how long it took him to grow that beard. That and much more coming up right now. Dr. Jeremy Weisz here. I'm founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders and how they overcome big challenges in life and business. Today we have Colin Theriot. I'm really excited. Hey, Colin.
Hi.
He's one of the titans of copywriting and direct response marketing. He founded the group CultofCopy, started in October 2012, and already they have 7,000 members just from word of mouth and the power of copy. Colin, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
You know, I want to thank Greg Roulette from Product Pros, who was a previous guest, and he reminded me you need to reach out to Colin. You were on my radar and list, but He just texted me and he's like, Colin. I'm like, got it, done. So, but Colin, I'm excited to hear your big lessons, you know, some of the mistakes, successes in your journey, and what worked, what didn't work. I always like to include a fun fact. And fun fact about Colin, I was asking him what people don't know. He said most people know everything, but he collects records and he is a motor scooter enthusiast and even built one himself.
Yes.
That's interesting.
I didn't build it from scratch, but I modified it heavily from its default setting.
Yeah. You know, I find that copywriters have interesting hobbies, so I like to ask that. And I also like to ask is about your beard. How long has it taken you to grow that beard?
It's funny because you mentioned the CultofCopy group started in October of 2012, and that is the last month in which I shaved.
Really?
And it wasn't a purposeful thing. I went on a cruise in October, and I forgot to bring a razor. So, like, for a week, I normally shave every couple of days or whatever. I have the Don Johnson stubbly look. Before this, I totally just dated myself with the Don Johnson Miami Vice reference.
I got that reference.
So I didn't shave for like a week, and then November is No Shave November. It's like a men's prostate cancer awareness thing. So I participated in that. And then in December is when my birthday is, as well as Christmas. And my wife got me like a beard comb and like special conditioner.
So she was encouraging you.
Right. So she encouraged it, and it was just one of those things where I kept growing it, and I interact a lot with my audience, and there are a lot of pictures shared and things, so people started to comment on it, and I speak at events, and it just sort of got to be a thing because I'm growing my own cult, and then also I'm growing
You look more like a cult leader with the beard.
Right. In fact, that got to be a joke because I grew my beard to look like a cult leader, and you can see behind me, this is my phony knighthood that I bought on the internet, and there's my phony doctorate, and my phone. Well, it's not phony. I can actually perform weddings in all 50 states, but there's my minister's license. So I'm technically the Reverend Dr. Sir Colin Theriot.
So what's the picture? What's the picture in between?
Oh, this one. That's it's a painting of a chimpanzee with a pencil balanced on his head. There's a funny story behind that. I actually. My office here that we're in is, I live in a historic, preserved sort of Civil War era town. And this room that we're in is in a 164-year-old farmhouse.
Wow.
And it's positioned in like where the general store in the town square were. And there's just little artsy shops. And I'm walking by a shop one day and I see that painting in the window. So I took a picture of it, and while I was walking back to my office from lunch, I put an offer just via my phone on the group, on the cult group, and I said, you know, if you, I forget what it was, I think it was a review. I said, I'll open up a review spot, and the first person who says they want it will get it for the price of this painting because I want the painting for my office. And like my phone died immediately. And by the time I got back to my office, which is literally like 2 blocks away, I had 8 responses So I had to fulfill 8 spots at a discount for the price of this painting.
Nice.
Because of that offer. But it's cool that it's in my office. My audience can see. They help me buy it. They know the story of the painting. But that's one of my favorite promotions I've ever done. Is I literally said, "Here's a painting I saw in a window. Do you want to buy it for me?" And I had a successful sale off of that promo.
I like it. I knew it had some story behind it because it's on your mantle, so it must be important.
Yeah.
So I want to hear your best expertise, advice on copy, but I also want to, and for me, the audience, get to know you a little bit. What was an influence for you growing up? What shaped you when you were a child?
I think one of the better aspects of what I do as a quote unquote copywriter is I'm good at storytelling. And I think that comes from my background and upbringing in that I'm Cajun by birth. And we're natural storytellers to begin with because we were largely a literate culture until, like the 40s. Huh. So we had a very rich oral history of storytelling that is usually like by the time America developed around us, because our little pocket of people were here before the United States existed, we had this rich tradition of storytelling verbally passed down from generation to generation that is very old world European. It's not very American. So we have that storytelling culture. And then on top of that, each of my grandparents had like 13 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And each of them like 6 kids. Each of them had 2 kids. So if you don't learn to be interesting and tell a good story, you don't get to talk because there's so many people competing to talk. So everyone is a great storyteller where I grew up. Everyone's great at telling jokes. I didn't encounter people that were bad at telling jokes until I went to college. It just got to be a thing. It's like, you just give it up, guy. You're not that good at telling jokes. So it was sort of ingrained in me there, but it's one of those things I didn't really realize it until years and years and years later. And I got into marketing, what an asset that is, because like I said, I grew up in a place where you're saturated with it. Everyone's, got interesting relatives and interesting stories. Everyone's like related to a pirate or a smuggler or, a folk hero. It's just a bizarre place to be from, and I didn't realize how unique and valuable that was until I moved away and got involved in business.
Yeah. So what's one of your favorite stories looking back from that time that one of your family members told you?
Oh, man. So let's see. Here's a good one. I have my late uncle. It's funny, since he passed away and I didn't grow the beard until years later after he passed away. But now when I look in the mirror, I realize I look like him because he had a beard my whole life. Oh. And I didn't know what his face looked like. But now that I have the beard, I realize we look alike. But anyway, his name was Glenn and his nickname was Pooch. And he owned a bar. And this bar was literally on the last piece of dry land in the southern coast of Louisiana, where I'm originally from, before it's just a road over marshland to get to like helicopter platforms for the oil field. So he's literally like on the end of the earth. He's a very bizarre guy, but he was a hefty gentleman, and he had had a leg amputated due to a work injury.
Oh, wow.
So he was in a wheelchair. So big, heavy set guy, big, giant white beard because he's an older guy and he's in a wheelchair. And he was dating a woman who had a kid in elementary school, and he attended the Christmas play. And he decided, I can't remember if I think he was probably just wearing a Santa Claus hat, being the holiday season. So he rolls in his wheelchair, and all the kids rush him because they think he's Santa Claus because he's a big fat guy with a white beard. Right. And then they realize he's only got one leg, and they're like, Santa Claus, what happened? And he told them that the reindeer ate his leg. And
they were scarred for life after that.
Illustration of my uncle's sense of humor, and that's why his nickname, besides being Pooch, his bar was actually called Pas Bons, which is Cajun for no good, because he sort of had that kind of sense of humor. He also, for example, he had a lot of friends coming over to his house, being an owner of a bar. He had lots of local friends, right? He got tired of people drinking his sodas and things, so he put a vending machine in his living room. So the whole time growing up that I knew him and we would visit, he had a vending machine in his living room.
That's a good story. So going into that, and when you went to college, I was, doing a lot of research on you, and you had a really interesting major.
I did. I originally went to school first it was graphic design, and then I kept making bad grades because at the time I went to school, they didn't let freshmen use computers yet. Like they wanted to make sure you could actually draw things by hand, which I thought was really bizarre and short-sighted, because I actually had a professor say, well, what happens if your computer breaks? And I'm like, I'm going to go to Kinko's and rent one. I'm not going to bust out the slide rule and the French curves and draw everything by hand. I promise that's not what's going to happen if my computer breaks. But anyway, I kept getting bad grades because of smudges and things, because I'm not a very neat, meticulous person. And after a year of making bad grades when I was used to making good grades in high school, I shifted majors to fine art, painting and drawing, where I could say that all of the smudges and things were done on purpose for artistic effect and not get penalized for them anymore, which I didn't realize it, but going into art the way that I did actually was about marketing in a way. I didn't think of it that way at the time because art's kind of anti-marketing, I guess you could say. But it ended up being a real education in marketing that I didn't realize how valuable it was until years later in retrospect.
How so?
Well, the thing about going to art school at a university is you're not necessarily graded on the work that you produce. So you'll have an assignment, you'll paint a painting to fulfill that assignment to show that you understand this artistic concept. But you have a critique where all the other students have a group critique and the professor's there, and you sort of get to explain what you meant to do, right? So what I realized is that you're graded on the critique, not on the painting. So it's really the story you're going to tell about the painting, why you did it that way, how it fulfills the assignment, what you meant to do. Because you could say things like, well, within this artificial educational environment where I only have a certain time frame to realize my vision for this artwork, this is what I was able to accomplish.
Right.
But here's what I meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
So really it's selling. It's building an imagination, an imaginary vision up in the audience's mind before they buy the product.
Yeah.
Because the product didn't exist yet. What I was selling them basically was an unfinished painting that was a much better idea than what I actually put on canvas.
Right.
But the big secret was I was never that good of a painter. So I had really good ideas that I was not physically or, skill-wise able to execute, but I could get it close enough to where the combination of the explanation and the painting were enough to get me the grade that I wanted. And no one ever told on me, and I don't know why, because they confronted me privately and were upset about it. But as you progress through any sort of, major in a university, the class size dwindles down until you're in the top level of your specialization. Right. As a senior, there's only a few people in your major. At least that's how it was at LSU in fine arts.
Yeah.
So you end up taking classes over and over with the same people. And I learned very quickly to use the same paintings from semester to semester. If they fulfilled the assignment obligation, I would just make up a different story and show the same painting. And students that had taken classes with me over and over noticed, but never said anything to any professor. But I would just come up with a different story, and they would say, well, that's not fair. You're not doing the assignment. And I'm like, well, the assignment is to prove you learned X, Y, Z. Does this canvas not prove that I already know that? Why would I paint it again just to prove it to a different guy? I already proved it. Here's the painting again, and I'll tell you this different story. And no one ever told on me, but I'm pretty sure I painted like maybe a third as many of the required assignments I was supposed to paint.
Why did you go into art in the first place?
It's one of those things where I hate to say it this way because it sounds like I'm bragging, but I really don't, because I don't really draw that much at all anymore. it's just something I was kind of naturally talented in. I always, won drawing contests as a kid.
Yeah.
My friends were always like, draw Superman for me, that kind of thing, earning like candy money in school. And, like I painted the entrance decorations for my high school dances. You
had a knack
was
for
involved.
it.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where I was just kind of going by the path of least resistance because it wasn't hard to do. And then combined with the storytelling, I could sort of, I almost think of it as like children's books because I have a 2.5-year-old son and a new one on the way. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And I've been reading a lot of children's books, and I sort of think of it as the children's book author position where you have these author illustrators that they're not great writers and they're not great artists, but if you can do both pretty good, you can make a decent children's book. So it's sort of, I went for that path. Like I never wanted to be the best artist. I never wanted to be a writer, but through a peculiar combination of art and storytelling, I got a university degree. I got an education and got to have the college party experience and do all that stuff, which has ended up being more beneficial than anything I think I actually learned in a class in college.
I think you should write a children's book and illustrate one because I think 80% of the ones I read, in 2 pages in, I'm thinking, does this mean? Who wrote this?
I actually wrote one, and it's supposed to be a warning story for bad children.
Okay.
And it's called Spoiled Prince Braden. And
is it on Amazon?
No.
I want to promote your children's books, not your Cultofcopy today.
Well, no, I'll put it together. My intention is to find an illustrator to help out with it. But the story basically is there's a spoiled prince, and he's constantly bad to other children because he's spoiled rotten, and he's bad to adults, and he always says, well, my dad's the king, and I can do whatever I want. And at the end of the story, a sinkhole opens up under the castle, and his mother and father, the king and queen, disappear forever. And he ends up poor and destitute in an orphanage, and no one cares about him.
I take that back. I'm actually
that's the end of the story.
I take that back. I think I would be scared of your children.
I did preface it to say that this was a terrible story for bad children.
Right.
It's meant to fix your edge cases that are going to end up as bad people and sort of straighten them out.
I like that. And one of them will include your uncle's leg getting eaten by a reindeer or something.
Yes.
So then, Colin, going from the art, what did it look like after college? What did the early days of your career look like?
All through college, I had sort of supported myself doing internet work. So like I was the website editor for the university newspaper. That was one of my on-campus jobs. Mm-hmm. This is another funny story. Because of that job, I was in charge of the design of advertisements, and a local web marketing company ran an ad to hire talented college students. And I was the guy whose inbox that ad showed up in, and I wanted the job. So I didn't run the ad and just went and applied for the job and got it. So I always worked in marketing and doing internet stuff for marketing. So I when I had a web-based career, it wasn't typical to I didn't work in an agency. I didn't make tons of websites for lots of companies. I first started working for one marketing company making their materials for their products. Then when I graduated, I got a job at an actual web design agency. That lasted about 6 months before they lost a client that they'd hired me on to be part of the service team for. So I got laid off. Immediately went back to the marketing company I'd worked for before and worked for them for a while. Ended up moving to Atlanta after my fiance at the time graduated. Not the same marriage I have now. That first one didn't work out, but that's how I ended up in Atlanta because she had family in Atlanta. We moved here, ended up doing web design for a boutique computer manufacturer. They're out of business now, but they'd be similar to Alienware was.
Okay.
I guess, you would go buy video cards from them or motherboards or whatever. And they would build computers for, if you needed a server or a gaming rig or whatever. And through them, I learned a bunch about photography because I would photograph the products. I wrote product descriptions. I built all their web pages. I wrote their email campaigns, made their physical magazine advertisements. basically they were a small operation, and I'm the kind of guy, like, whatever task comes up, I'm like, sure, I'll take a crack at it.
Yeah.
So
you did a little bit of everything, it sounded like.
Right. So I got a big education in that stuff, and that company experienced some what turned out to be fatal family-based growing pains, because like the whole family worked there and they didn't agree on the direction of the company, and I sort of jumped out before it fell to pieces. But my deal with them was they wanted increasing and ever increasing performance of the website, but didn't want to invest into me learning new web design techniques or coding or marketing or any of that stuff. Like, they just wanted it to get better and better and more, while not giving me the leeway or skill or time or resources to actually get better.
Yeah.
And I decided it was more important to me to want to get better than just continuing to do that job. So I started looking elsewhere. I ended up at a wedding favor company doing e-commerce, the same sort of field, just a different product. And one of the owner's husbands started a marketing company that ended up being this thing called Stompernet.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if they're still around or not. I quit them in like August of 2009, I think. But at the time when it just started, it was e-commerce training for other website owners that owned online stores. So it was pretty high level stuff. Most of their customers were like, six-figure to $1 million businesses already. And they went to them to learn like more advanced SEO type stuff.
Right.
And me being the kind of person that whatever task needs doing, sure, I'll take a shot at it. You won't hear me say, well, I don't know how to do that. That's not my job.
You just figure it out.
Right. So I was sort of an asset that got pulled over to that department, which then spun off into its own company. I ended up being their chief marketing copywriter because their writer got sick or was too busy, and they're like, we need the sales letter rewritten. Who wants to do it? Sure, I'll take a shot at it. I do it. My boss at the time was Andy Jenkins, who I think is with Marketing Genesis now.
Yeah, he does a lot of video stuff.
He ended up doing Video Boss, which I helped him write the copy for that. That was after we both left Stompernet. But anyway, he was my boss at the time at that company, and he said, that's pretty good. You like doing this? I'm like, sure, it's not that hard. I'm good at telling stories or whatever.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, you're the chief marketing copywriter, so get good at it because that's all you do from now on. And it did that for a while. When I left that company.
So go back for a second,
Sure.
Colin. What were some of the early copy you wrote for Stompernet and Video Boss that was so effective, or what didn't work early on? Because you were kind of training yourself at this point, right?
Yes. Well, what's unique, I think, about my career in the copy world is that I didn't start as like a bottom level writer with no connections or assets to work with. I was immediately
thrown in the fire
copywriter for like a multi-million-dollar company.
Yeah.
Just because I happened to be there when they accidentally became a multi-million-dollar company. So they took a risk on me. Like, I wouldn't have gotten the job if I had tried to get it based on credentials, if they had ran an ad. I just happened to be there.
Right.
I volunteered and they liked it. That being said, they were in a position with a huge list, an agitated market, proven assets that had already converted before I got hired on, that were like, basically my job was to build on it and augment it. So they'd already had their first launch. They were going to do their first relaunch, and a lot of new things had been added to the offer. So that was my job: take the original sales letter, integrate all this new stuff, and then build from there, right? So what I had that other people didn't have was all of this insight from people who were already successful. So I wasn't critiqued by the market. I was critiqued by marketing geniuses. And then I was immediately having my work tested by markets of like hundreds of thousands of paying customers at a time.
Right.
So it was a very rapid learning curve because I wasn't building up from zero.
Right. You saw immediate feedback not only from the expert side, but from the audience side. So you saw kind of what worked, what didn't work, or what worked, what got responses.
And I had the advantage of starting with successful foundations to say, well, here's a flagship sales letter. figured out what works about it because we're going to augment it and add these different things.
Yeah.
So I was never writing anything from scratch. I was building on things that worked. So I always had this sort of Lego-like view of copy.
Yeah.
Because I had all these assets that I sort of just assembled in new ways instead of creating new things out of scratch.
Yeah.
So to me, unlike art, it was never a purely creative exercise. It was much more creative assembly of things that we already had that we knew to work.
Yeah.
And that's part of why when I went into doing freelance, I had more of a mentality of I have templates that I know to work, and we're going to build everything that you need out of templates instead of thinking of it as this long creative process where you need something perfectly unique that exactly captures your vital essence.
Yeah.
We'd forget all that. I have a template. Here's the story structure that works. We're going to plug in your parts. We're going to put that out there. If it works, awesome. If we're both happy. If it doesn't work, then we'll tweak it.
Yeah.
But this is what we're going to put out there as fast as possible because, like I said, when I got hired, I was already the chief marketing writer of a company that was already going. So, like, day one, I'm blogging to that audience. I'm writing emails to that audience. I'm making all the affiliate offers, all of those things. So I had to very quickly wade in and start doing it.
Yes.
Right. You know?
Yeah, and I want to talk about some of your structure, but at the time, first, what worked and what didn't work with what you saw with this large audience?
Up to that point, this was like in this would have been like 07 to 09.
Okay.
And what the marketing companies and the sort of strata that this company was in had been doing up to that time had not really taken advantage of the social aspects of online marketing. And I don't just mean social media, but I mean, like, they had looked at blogs up to that point as like, oh, here's something people are doing. I'm going to use that to post my ads. And not a lot of them had taken the time to do the conversational aspects, right? Actually interact with your audience and try to position yourself as an influencer. And what I was really interested in is looking at this guru stature that the people that I was working with and for and writing as basically a ghostwriter under their name.
Yeah.
What components were that built that reputation, that created it, that assembled it so that people saw them in that way? Because what I really realized is, for me, copy, my journey into the world of persuasion and marketing has taken me away from copy as far as the word that's written on the page. What's more interesting to me now is what is called exformation. So information is what's in the actual page, in the actual message. Exformation is what's in that particular reader's head already that gives context to that message. Mm-hmm. So when you have
So give me the example.
Well, sure. So you have a marketer who's got a very tuned in audience that's just really the biggest fans in the world of what they have to do, and say they're promoting a particular offer. That person to their audience may just have to say, check this out, and a link, and they can end up being like the top affiliate promoter of that launch. But if you're a copywriting hopeful and you look at that email that they sent, that's one line and a link, check it out, and that's it, there's nothing there for you to copy. Where's the magic? Why did that person's message work?
Right.
And it's not because of the message. It's because of the exformation that they built up and crammed into that audience's head before that point, right? So when they read it, they know who sent it. They know who it's from. They know why it's great. They know why they want to read it, why it's relevant. All of that is already in their own head, like it's their own idea. So the less you say, the more influential it is, because they just want to do what they want to do, but you're suggesting it, sort of. Mm-hmm. So to me, that was the more powerful kind of marketing. And that's what I was more interested in creating. And this particular company that I worked at had all the assets in place. They had a huge list. They had an active blog following. It was the kind of thing where I could create a conversation and have it in multiple mediums, all building towards this influential structure to where when people were inside of our circle and inside our little world that we built, they just sort of, I don't know, the way I describe it is that if you show people that your insights and decision making is sort of the same as what they would make if they had all the information and experience you have, they sort of quit being skeptical and sacrifice their opinion making mechanisms to you, right? You're their shortcut to having an informed, educated opinion. So rather than forming one themselves, they'll just see what you say and follow what you say. So when you put people in that position where you're in that sort of influence role, that's great for the kind of marketing that people like me and my clients do, which is you want to build up an audience and sell them things over and over again while they're in your audience. Mm-hmm. So that positioning, when done deliberately, is much more efficient than trying to figure out what is the perfect headline, right? So like a lot of people ask me things like, what's your best performing subject line? And I say, I don't worry about that because I make people care about who it's from. Right. Because if you care about who it's from, it doesn't matter what the subject line is. So that's where I put my focus is
yes,
making people love you, and they don't necessarily remember exactly why, but any message from you is urgent and important and meaningful, regardless of what the actual content of the message itself is.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like one of the questions I have for, the legends of copyright like you, I can't not have a question about headlines, but I get the same answer, which is exactly what you said from everyone is, who cares about headlines? You got to set up context for that headline.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, to give you a more useful tip, because I know that one is one of those where it's like, oh, well, make who it's from matter. And you're like, well, that doesn't tell me anything I can use. One thing to keep in mind is the subject line of an email, for example, doesn't exist in isolation. So my inbox looks very, very different than probably your inbox. And you want to think about what the inbox of your target audience might look like. So you go and look at what are the blogs they might be subscribing to, what newsletters might they be involved in, what advertisements are they getting from companies that sell this kind of stuff. So then you subscribe to all those things, make, a Gmail account or a folder and use a, sub variable, whatever, however you do it. But start building an inbox that looks like what your ideal customer, which is, I'm obsessed with this topic. I get all the information about this in my inbox. What does that inbox look like? Yeah. And once you know what that looks like, writing subject lines that stand out aren't about the words that are in it. It's about breaking the pattern. So if they're all very dry subject lines, like if every newsletter uses the exact same subject line and you want to break it, start messing with them because you know what the inbox looks like. Start breaking the pattern and letting them know that you're trying to get in touch with them. And that's what works versus trying to formulate a particular wording, because I don't do this. I'm sure you don't either. When I'm looking at my emails, I don't read every subject line. I skim it. And if nothing pops out, I don't read it. And that's probably why I have like over 100,000 unopened emails in my Gmail account. I don't keep a tidy inbox, but I think most people are the same way, where they usually just hit delete if they don't even read the subject. Whereas if you have a pattern that you're breaking, they can't help but read it because it's broken the pattern of the inbox. So that's a useful way for me to say, it doesn't matter what your headline is, but here's how to find what'll work. If they're long, if everyone's writing long ones, write a short one. That'll break the pattern. If everyone's are short, you write a really long one. That'll break the pattern. But you don't know what the pattern is unless you have an inbox that's like a test inbox of what that market sees.
Yeah, and I find that most copywriters like yourself, you do a lot of research ahead of time. So it's, you're kind of getting in the minds and...
Well, like I said, I have all these templates and checklists that I've developed. And when I know I need to start a project, I just go through and start hunting for the checklist of things that I need to fill that in. So another example might be, if I'm beginning a project, I know at some point I'm going to need to talk to that audience in a way where I'm describing their pain, their experience of their struggle, or whatever it is that I'm selling a solution to. I don't know what that is. I'm a hired gun. right? So like
Right.
that could be anything.
Yeah. So give me an example of one of those.
Okay, so a checklist for agitating problems for me is very simple. No matter what problem or pain someone's facing, these three facets are going to apply to it. So I only need to research enough to be able to describe these. First, they're going to be frustrated because they're stagnant. They're stuck, right? They're stuck in a position they don't want to be in. And that is, frustrating. It's exhausting. It makes them unhappy every day because they're just stuck, right? They don't want to be where they are. It doesn't matter what it is. They're somehow stuck.
Yeah.
The second one is they're uncertain, meaning they don't know why they're stuck. They don't know what's keeping them held back. They don't know how to get out. They may not even know what other options are available other than being stuck, right? They're just uncertain. They don't know what's going on. The third one is unsuccessful, meaning anything they've thought to try to get unstuck has not worked. And for whatever reason, any options that exist that they haven't tried, they simply don't believe they're gonna work because of their
They've
own
tried so much, and
right.
Yeah.
Right. So no matter what problem it is, whether it's like, a home remedy for hemorrhoids,
Yeah, it could be anything.
buying SEO services,
Weight
for
loss,
thousands of dollars, whatever buyer it is that needs that as a solution, they feel stuck,
Yeah.
they feel uncertain, and they feel unsuccessful. All you got to do is hit those 3 points and figure out what to say. And if you mirror that back to someone, they're going to think either two things. One, he actually has experienced this problem because he knows it so well. Or two, he's just super empathic and just really knows what it's like to be me.
Yeah.
Either way, you get put in a trust position because you've just diagnosed their problem in a deeper way than they themselves understand it.
Yeah.
And the reason that works is because it's an illusion of perception. People have these problems and they think they're unique because they're ashamed and they don't discuss them with people.
Yeah.
But really, there's like 7 different kinds of people and there's just billions of us, but we're not all that different. So because we don't discuss our problems with other people, we don't realize that they're all the same problems.
Right.
So if I describe your problem to you, you feel like that's a personal diagnosis, when really I'm just describing a general problem, which is why things like phony psychics can exist, because they can make guesses that seem really specific to you, but they're really just generalized guesses based on demographics. If I say to you, do you have a job? And you're like, yes. And I'm like, are you kind of dissatisfied with where you are in your job? Do you feel like you're adequately compensated or even recognized for your contributions to this company? I would say like 1 in 1,000 people would say, yeah, totally. But if I describe that to you and you don't share that feeling with people, you might feel like you're the only one that feels that way.
Sure.
And I'm the only one who understands. It's just a trick.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel that makes you better in relationships, or specifically with the opposite sex, like when you were dating?
Well, it's funny because I mentioned that I've been divorced, and before I got a job at marketing, I was remarried already, but I did internet dating for a while I was working at that computer company. So I had a lot of, I was on the internet constantly all day at work. So I had time in front of the computer to mess around with things. And what I was doing were marketing tactics that I didn't realize at the time because I had never studied marketing. So I had a form letter that I would send to every girl that showed up new on the dating site with only one little section that was custom tailored. And then I would split test certain lines to get a reaction. Yeah. And the lines that got the most reaction stayed in, whether they were relevant to the conversation or not.
So I'm married, but I'm curious what worked.
I'll tell you what the number one line was, and this might sound devious, but it was in response to an actual problem with online dating sites, which is professionals using it as advertising. Because most of these dating sites, it's free for women to contact men, but men are the one who have to pay for credits to contact women, because that's what the economics of it are, right? So you would have, professionals, prostitutes, who would go on there and fill out a profile, and then you would get in touch with them, and the conversation would go along the lines of, oh, well, you know, we can go out, but I need some help with my rent this month or something like that, right?
Oh, I didn't realize that what you meant by professionals. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Professionals that are dating for money.
Wow.
Not exactly, but that's the conversation that begins from that particular aspect. And I mean, depending on the positioning of the website, like who their dating audience is, that would be more or less prevalent. But if it's like, oh, you're cool and young and then live in the city and want to go out and have fun and meet singles, there are going to be a lot of, like, you know, pros working.
Got it.
So I put a line in there that was something like, if you're a professional or you're looking to get your rent paid or your bills paid, I'm not interested in that. That's not really what I'm about. It was a legitimate line in response to many responses that I got along those lines, which I only got because I was carpet bombing with this form letter.
Right.
That one line prompted more response from people, and I think it's because they couldn't stand even a stranger thinking for a second that they might be a prostitute. Like, they thought it might, like, is it something I wrote in my profile that made him think that? It wasn't. It was just a form letter.
Right.
But it
agitated them in some way.
It made them self-conscious about what they had written that might make me think that. And it was just one of those things where that one line out of, I mean, it was a significant letter. That one line garnered more response, and all that response was all I needed to put my foot in the door, because I had to pay to send you the first contact. But once you contacted me back, then it was free to continue a conversation.
Yeah.
So really, these form letters got to be about getting my foot in the door. And then once I got the foot in the door, then we could go on a coffee date or whatever and build up and see if we liked each other. And like, I liked being married. I just picked the wrong mate the first time. So I was specifically like casting the net very wide and getting a lot of things going at once so that I could see what I liked and what I didn't like, because I was like 25 or something at the time. And I decided before I was going to go all in again, maybe my preconceptions about what I liked and what was actually good for me might be skewed by marketing or media or whatever. I had a type, and that type had never successfully worked all the way through a series of breakups and eventually a divorce. So I'm like, I'm bad at picking people that I can be with long term. So I deliberately dated against type. I had a form letter that got sent out to everybody, and it eventually worked. I met my wife. We eloped. We got married. We have 2 kids now. The strategy worked, but she does hate when I tell the story that, like, she was marketed to.
You know,
she doesn't remember, but she actually got. I remember her because she had a very quirky photo. It was like turned sideways, so I remembered it. Uh-huh. She didn't respond to the first time, so she got a split test. She got tested. She didn't respond the first time, so I sent her another one that was different, and then she responded to that.
What was the second one?
It was just a slightly different variant. Uh-huh. You know, it had like more expanded personality stuff where, like, I've read about you, but it also built off of, hey, I didn't hear back from you last time, which is funny because that's like a cheesy tactic some email marketers use. They'll send you an email the very first time and it says something similar to that. Hey, I didn't hear back from you. Here's this again, even though it's the first contact.
Yeah. So anyone, you know, most people, their opening line is, you know, do you come here often? Yours is, I hope you're not a prostitute. So
right. And again, I know how terrible that must sound, but it was one of those things that really, I didn't realize it at the time, but it gave me insight into how to communicate with people, because it's not necessarily like, in my mind, like, a lot of people, when they want to communicate, they'd be scared of, say, offending someone. I say, if you really want to get someone's attention, offend them accidentally and then apologize and show how that's not what you meant. Mm-hmm. Because that'll get their attention. Just not being offensive doesn't get anyone's attention.
Right.
But if you offend them first, then you're like, no, that's not what I meant. Hear me out, man. That opens the door. You know, that gets your foot in the door in a way that didn't before. So I think maybe I might be more willing to be more provocative with language.
Yeah.
because I understand the point of it is to get a conversation going. Like, I'm not afraid to offend you or make you misunderstand me on purpose, because then that's an opportunity to explain myself. And I know I'm charming once you are listening.
Yeah.
But I need to get you to listen first.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about, because I didn't realize, but as you're saying this, one of my good friends, growing up, and this is what he did. He would just offend people. I'm like, why are you saying that to them? But he would get responses. So it was interesting. Mm-hmm. This goes back into, though, your formula. You were talking a little about your formula, and you have a formula for writing any message in a sincere way.
Yes. The formula came to be called the Viking Velociraptor because it's got 5 steps and they all start with V. Mm-hmm. It's because I'm a little OCD and I'm like a word nerd. So when I make steps for things, I'll try and, either make an acronym or it's dumb. It's really dumb, but that's what helps me remember it and create a pattern in my head. So this 5-step formula, and this is something I developed while working at Stompernet, because I was writing their blogs, I was writing their email posts, I was writing their short-term promotions as well as drafts for sales letters. Like, I wrote all the material. And I wanted a formula that would, like I said, cash in on those pre-existing assets that the audience knew about who this email was from, and build on them, reinforce them, and then still drive them to action while being influential, but never feel like a push, so that there was never any pushback. I wanted it to be to where we're just having a conversation, and if you decided not to buy whatever I was telling you about, it didn't feel like that's the only reason I got in touch with you and I was wasting your time, right? It just felt like, hey, are you interested in this? No? Cool. We'll talk next time. I got other stuff to do. So part of setting that up had to do with looking at message formulas that resonated with people. So I looked at like stories and stand-up comedian joke formats, because it's about a really quick intro. And then once you've got the door open, like I said, once I've got my foot in the door, then we can talk about what I wanted to talk about. Yeah. So the 5 steps are verify, validate, vantage, values, and villains. So step 1, verify. Verify something they've seen or heard or observed or thought. So that's the opening line of the conversation. Hey, did you see this thing in the news? Or, hey, have you been getting a lot of emails about this? Or have you heard this new song that's playing on the radio? Anything could be relevant to the niche, could not be, doesn't matter. Then you validate. Step 2, validate their internal response so that they know your equipment is in tune, basically. So if I say, hey, have you heard that new Miley Cyrus song? Man, that's terrible. I'm putting forth a specific response because I want the audience to say, yes, I've seen that, and yes, I feel that way. So now I'm outside your head. We live in the same world and see the same things, but also I'm inside your head. We overlap, right? Like the way I feel is the way
you're in agreement on something.
Yes. Yeah. And then you use that as a vantage. Step 3, a vantage to introduce your own information. So to go back to that example that I just made up, you heard that new Miley Cyrus song? Man, she's just terrible. I don't like the image she portrays to young girls, but she's kind of a marketing genius if you think about it. Then I would, go into a spiel maybe about like some marketing thing that she did that I thought was clever, which leads into, hey, if you like marketing, maybe you want to sign up for my newsletter, for example, right? So you use that pivot. And the reason I use that example is because a lot of people get caught up and they're like, oh, I can't think of something to verify and validate from my niche. It doesn't have to be related to your niche at all. All you're trying to do is show them we encounter and experience the same things in the outside world, meaning that we walk the same paths. Yeah. We're in the same universe. And then you validate the way that they feel about it. So they're like, you're a character they can occupy. You're a mask they can wear. They can see through your point of view, which again does
so you can just watch the news or pick, do anything and get it.
Yeah. Exactly. Any pop culture reference, any current event, any niche specific thing, whatever.
It pops into my brain the airplane that got lost. I mean, that's all over everywhere. That would be a perfect. Yeah.
Exactly. Like if I were selling like backup services that happen whether you're aware of them or not, I would use that airplane thing and say, most people are saying, how could you lose track of the whole airplane? Isn't someone in charge of that? Isn't someone watching it? The answer is no. Like, unless something goes wrong, no one's watching that stuff. Why would someone stare at the middle of the Indian Ocean for no reason unless a plane accidentally got diverted over there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then you would say, well, backups are like that. No one worries about it until something terrible happens. And then you're like, well, there were a million things we could have done, but by then it's too late. So don't be that guy. You know what I mean? Like, you can use anything to relate to what you're talking about if you use that position. And then, like I said, it does that thing where if you show people that your thought processes are the same as the ones they would have if they had your observation skills, they start giving you their opinion making facilities. And that's why you can send them a one-line email that says, check this out. And they just go check it out because they feel like, well, if he likes it, I would like it too if I checked it out because we think the same way. You know, that's all the unspoken stuff that's already in their head.
Right.
So back to the formula, to reinforce it, say I made you that offer and you're not interested in it. The way I reinforce it at the end of the email is step 4 is values. So some value we have in common, something we think is important, whether it's family, whether it's similar background, whether we're colleagues in the same industry, whatever, some value we have in common. I'll reinforce that. And then villains, step 5, is I'll validate in some way that we have a common enemy. There's someone that we both hate in our market.
Yeah.
So to go back again to the Miley Cyrus thing, if I'm selling as me, I said, you've seen that new Miley Cyrus video where she's riding on the wrecking ball. Boy, that song sucks. But she's actually kind of a marketing genius if you think about it because of blah, blah, blah. Here's a newsletter if you're interested in marketing things like what I just talked about. You can subscribe to this newsletter. And listen, I know what it's like. I know that you're busy. The newsletter only comes out once a week, and it sort of summarizes everything that happens in my group. So if you're busy, you don't have to be on Facebook all day and worry about missing anything. And then the villain would be the values, by the way, that last part, something we have in common. I know your time is valuable. I'm saving you time. The villain would be, unlike other newsletters that are going to hit your inbox every single day trying to get you to buy something. That's an imaginary villain I just made up. But now all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I hate guys like that. Now the presumption is I'm not that guy. We're on the same team. So values and villains, it's sort of, if I share a value with you, now we're drawn together in a positive way. And if I shared a villain that we have in common that's out there, now we're pushed together from outside. Yeah. So it's two sort of forces that make people see us as being in the same group together. We're in it together. We're friends. Yeah. But it's just as simple as like we have something in common between us, and also we hate outside stuff. So now we're in the same bucket.
It's amazing how powerful that part is. You know, the villain part, having a common enemy. You could take two people who probably don't like each other, and you have a common enemy, and they bond. You know.
Yes. It's that old phrase: "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." And that, I believe, the origin of that is from Sun Tzu's Art of War. And he's talking about how if you're fighting an enemy on your border, the guy who is an enemy of that guy on the other side of him, you're both enemies of the same guy. So that guy could be your ally because you both have a common enemy. But the reverse of that statement is true, to where if we have a common enemy, I'm just going to presume that we're friends. And the example I give to people, and it's funny because I'm not a sports person, but most people do get this example. If you go into a bar and there's like a key game playing on the big screens in this bar, and one team scores, depending on who cheers, you know who is your friend and who's not in that bar automatically. Right. Like in one instant, you all of a sudden know where you can sit, who's going to bug you, who you don't like for no reason other than they booed or whatever, you know? Like that one dividing line, which is like what's a sports team? Like where you're from maybe, or
LSU, yeah.
Right, you know what I mean? Like what's a sports team? Why is that any reason to decide whether you like or dislike someone? Right. But people do it all the time, and they get that example instantly when I say, here's the value in portraying that it's just the same as being in a bar and wearing the jersey of the team you support and cheering appropriately. Everyone there knows, are they on your team? Or are they not on your team?
Right.
That's it. That's all it's about.
Yeah. Like the value for us is I appreciate the beard.
Right.
So, what was, on that topic, Colin, what's one of the successful campaigns through CultofCopy that you could talk about?
Well, we talked about that monkey painting before.
Yeah.
That one's one of my favorite because I always try to come up with dumb reasons to have a sale, almost to prove that you don't need a real good reason to have one.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the lessons I try to teach in the CultofCopy will be like that. I call them meta lessons, where I'll write like a headline for a post, and then the post will be about how to write headlines like that one. Like if that headline got you to read this post, here's how to write headlines like that to get people to read your post, that kind of thing. Sort of self-referential.
Yes.
So within the group, I'll do a lot of examples like that. Like I go to an event every year that they've had it. It's the Warrior Networking event in Raleigh.
Okay.
Which is, it just happened to be put on by two guys that I knew, Sam England and Brian McLeod. I think this was the last one, or maybe they're going to rebrand it or anything. But every year in March in Raleigh, because that's where Sam lived, they would have an event there. I would go every year. I spoke a couple of times. Other times I would just go to meet up and hang out with people. What were we talking about? I lost my train of thought there. What was the question?
Successful campaigns, and you were
successful campaign. So, for whatever reason, every time I would go there, I would have travel difficulties. So one time, I missed my plane because the train got held up, and I just didn't get to my flight in time. The second time I got there in plenty of time, started drinking Bloody Marys, and without realizing it, watched my plane taxi away from the gate and leave without me.
Horrible.
Yeah, and then like another time I got there and the plane that we're supposed to fly out on had a defective bathroom, which apparently FAA regulations require 2 working bathrooms before the plane can leave, which I want to point out, the flight between Atlanta and Raleigh is less than an hour. I'm pretty sure they could have just said, everybody go.
Everyone hold it.
Right.
Wear a diaper. I don't know.
Yeah. It's one of those where like the amount of time it took for them to put us on a different plane, I could have driven to Raleigh and already be there.
Right.
So anyway, it got to be like a joke that I'm stuck in the airport trying to go to this stupid event. To cheer me up, I'm going to have a sale on my items that I offer to the group at a discount, but you have to PM me to get it. And I would always make people jump through some kind of hoop. Like, you tell me why you deserve to get this insane discount. And people in my audience, like I said, I interact with them to the point, it's like, I don't want to make it seem condescending when I refer to them as fans and when I say I made them into fans on purpose, but I did. Like, that was the goal of the group, was to put myself on display in such a way where the only people I really should have in there are people that like what I'm putting out there, right? Because I'm the only producer of content outside the group that pulls people in. So my audience responds really well to those kind of things, and it conditions them to like always be on the lookout, pay attention to what I'm doing. You never know when I'm gonna have like a sale that lasts from my flight to the time I get to my hotel. And things like that I'm always pleased with, because they're reinforcements that what I'm doing and what I teach people to do work, which is, if you're just an interesting person and you do interesting things, there are an abundance of ways you can make a living online from building your own audience, as long as you stop being shy and start sharing what's interesting to you with people.
So what's something, Colin, that you thought would work that didn't?
Early last year, I had a personal campaign that didn't work. That was, I wanted to do, I guess you would call it like a short-term continuity kind of thing, where I wanted to say, like, I've already used to sell sales letter reviews. So if you had an existing sales letter, I would review it and give you notes back for a fee. I don't do that anymore. I already have a sales letter template which people can buy and write their own sales letters with. That product sells very well. What I wanted to do was add on, I guess, sort of an advanced version to where if buying the template wasn't good enough, what you would do is bring me your draft of a sales letter or the skeleton of one, and we would build it up together over the course of a few weeks. And that I intended to be, I think, in the $1,000, $2,000 range, because it was going to be like 4, 5, 6 weeks.
It can be like a back and forth feedback, like they'll produce something.
And it was just something that it just didn't catch on with the audience I had at that particular time. I could probably do well with it if I launched something like that now, but I'm not in a position to want to put that time into it. But that's one that I just ran up the flagpole and it didn't work. Nobody got mad. Nobody bailed. It just went away quietly. Another one I did, I had a group review continuity thing where it was like $100 a month. Everyone who's a member every week could submit a URL for me to review. I would pick one at random, review it in front of the group as a group webinar, and everybody would get the recording. Doing it randomly was the only way I could make it fair. But for some reason, the group that I had at the time didn't have enough people willing to invest in it because they didn't have enough products to throw in there. So it ended up being like by the 5th or 6th week, someone was going to get their second review.
It was repeating.
Right. And the amount they were paying to be in the group did not justify getting 2 reviews out of me at that price. So that was one where it was successful and it was making profit every month. But positioning wise, I decided that one was going to be just shut down because it was basically devaluing my review services instead of adding value like I wanted to. And that's one I could have made up the difference if I'd promoted it more heavily and got enough people into it. But with the position I was in at the time, I was just like, well, that didn't work. Let's just try something else. Because I like to try out all of my easy ideas first.
Right.
And see if they're pass or fail. And then I'll develop the easy ideas that worked. Then I'll try to add to them. Versus I tried something really difficult and complicated and it didn't work. A lot of people might want to put the time into it to turn that into a winner. Whereas I have a grab bag of like 15 more easy ideas. I want to go make sure those don't work first.
Yeah.
Before I spend any more time on a difficult one that takes a lot of time out of my day.
Yeah. What are some of your rituals that get you in the best frame of mind to write copy and headlines?
I have kind of a reputation of being kind of a jerk on Facebook in a way. And I like, a lot of people say business personas shouldn't like talk about like politics or religion or, anything like that. I have no sacred cows. If you post it on Facebook, I'm presuming you want to have conversation about it. And if it's dumb, I'm going to make you defend your dumb statement.
Right.
And I actually have fans because of that. Not the people I engage with in that way, but
yeah, they're like, I love you, Colin. Thanks for ripping me to shreds.
Right. Well, there are people who follow me because they find it funny when I get involved. Like I'm anti multi-level marketing. So anytime someone's posting something about a pyramid scheme they're involved in, I really challenge them about it and push them. But it's because most of the time they're involved in a scam and I don't want them to get hurt. But I make a mockery of them sort of in public. Because while I probably can't save them, I want to make them look stupid enough from the outside that they have trouble convincing people to join their little marketing cult. That would be one example. Like dangerous anti-vaccination people that don't really have scientific backing on their side to argue things. Just things like that where I can say, well, I have this giant pile of evidence that you're wrong. What's your counterpoint to this? Oh, okay. That doesn't make sense for these reasons. Here's another one. What's your counterpoint? Like I debate people. And I feel like that's good practice. And a lot of time I get my warm-up activity out of engaging specifically with people I disagree with in a polite and sort of respectfully completely disassembling their argument piece by piece kind of way. At the same time, just to show I'm not like real snooty about it, I'll point out like logical fallacies and cognitive biases in people's arguments that make them not logically sound. But I'll use those same fallacies and biases to convince people of my own side, because that's good practice for marketing. So I'm like I'm the least partial and fair person to debate, because I use the dirty tricks that I point out that you're using, that you may, like that's how I warm up. I know it's kind of weird, but I mean, it's real practice,
Right. So how does that fit into your ritual? So you go and do that, then?
I mean, when I wake up in the morning, I just sort of go through my news feed and I see what people have commented on things that I post that might have been designed to poke people and provoke a response. One of my favorite ones right now is I repeatedly post every time there's a negative story in the media about Bitcoin.
I think I saw some headline from you.
To it and say Bitcoin, more like shitcoin.
I remember.
I've done that literally 5 or 6 times now. And all of the people in my circle that are like defenders of cryptocurrencies pop up and start posting all kind of preachy stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but like the money in my pocket doesn't lose 300% of its value 4 times a month. Sure, it might go back up, but today I can't buy shit with this $5. So I poke fun at them, not because I care either way, I don't, but because that's a conversation that people get heated about. It makes for good dynamics in a conversation. Mm-hmm. I don't want it to seem like I'm just boosting my clout score by getting responses like some viral posts do, where they're just like, yes, I love it. Yes. I don't want that. I want a conversation where at least 1 or 2 people are going back and forth, leading to hundreds of comments where they can't escape that conversation throughout that day because it's so compelling to them. That's where I really like to play. On top of that, when I don't feel like wasting a whole day practicing, I do 55-word short stories. They're called microfiction. I stole the format from some magazine contests that I found online. I even opened a group about that, and there are tons of people in there who like the format. But the idea with that is the rules are you have to have a character, a plot, a setting, a conflict, and a resolution in 55 words or less. I try to hit exactly 55 words because I find it's a beautiful blend of creativity and editing, which are kind of at odds at each other. So when you can say something profound in a more elegant way, it has more impact than if you take a whole paragraph. And I'm bad at being verbose. I write a lot more than is necessary most of the time. So that exercise in particular turns on all the parts of my brain that I want to be working when I'm going to write a post or an article, because it's like creative ideas plus whittle it down to the essence instead of rambling on.
Right.
So that's
hard to do.
Yeah. So writing a 55-word short story that fits all those qualifications, every time I write one, it's like 150 words. And then I have to start chopping it down. So that is another one that I found.
It's like the Twitter of short stories.
Right. And I find the editing down aspect, by the time I get to having a story that I like that fits the requirements of the rules, I've chopped it way down and then had to rephrase it in a better way than it sounded the first time that I said it.
Yeah.
And even though some of the cuts might be hard to make, it really teaches you what truly is necessary or not necessary. Mm-hmm. And like I said, my true belief is that the most powerful persuasive stuff is the stuff that comes from what's already in the reader's head. So practicing this idea of, did I need to say that? Or is it kind of already implied by what I said? Is the reader just going to imagine that part without me having to say it out loud?
Yeah.
Then you don't need to say it. So like if I only have 55 words and I'm telling you a story that happens in space, I don't need to describe the vastness of space and then also the tiny compartment inside the spaceship. Like those are superfluous, because you're probably going to imagine those by yourself by me describing one little part of the setting.
Right.
And that to me is very valuable because it teaches me to write more in the way that is compliant with what I teach, which is that you want people to engage themselves in what you write. You want them to jump in and use their imagination. So when I say, hey, did you see that thing? How'd you feel about it? You know, like, I want you to put your parts of your brain into my message so that when you internalize it, it's no longer what I said to you. It's just what you think and know and believe.
Yeah. It's even more powerful. And that takes a lot of discipline, Colin, though. Where do you get that discipline to do that? I feel like if I tried that for a day, I
don't want to give anybody the mistaken idea that I have any discipline whatsoever. I originally set out to write like one of those stories a day. And I go through spurts where I did that. But like after a year, I had like 70 of them. So obviously I did like slightly more than one a week, but not anywhere near one a day. And then when I picked it up and started this group for it, which is the Cult of 55 Fiction, I made the rule that I wouldn't go 2 days without posting one. Because I thought if I give myself a day off, that'll be all right. Yeah. Well, then I went to that conference I mentioned in Raleigh at the end of March, and I gave myself time off because I wasn't working at all, so I didn't need to warm up. And then when I got back into the work groove, I had so much to catch up on, I didn't bother spending an hour warming up. And now I'm out of the habit again. I haven't written one since before I went on that trip. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where I don't necessarily...
You'll pick it up when you need it type of thing.
Exactly. If I'm feeling stuck, the next time I need to get down and write something... Yeah. I'll sit there and I have a file that I keep because like it's a 55-word short story. An idea can be 1 word long. So I just have this notepad on my iPod, a note file that's just 1 or 3 word ideas for these little stories that I just collect. And then I'll just go pick one at random in between thinking about it, writing it, editing it down and publishing it. Yeah. It might be an hour. Yeah. So if I'm stuck on something and I've spent more than an hour being stuck, I'll say, I'm going to give an hour and go do this stupid thing that has no consequence whatsoever. Right. And that'll get me unstuck so that when I come back, whatever was clogging me up is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. And Colin, I want to ask you your best piece of advice for the audience. But before, tell me, who are some of your mentors and their best advice for you?
I mentioned Andy Jenkins. He was really my first mentor, the first guy who gave me a shot by hiring me and then putting me as a copywriter. Yeah. And then when I went freelance, he gave me my first big freelance projects that sort of set my price point and quality level right out of the gate. So I didn't really have to build up a reputation because I had done Video Boss with Andy Jenkins. I'm pretty good at copy. So I never really had to work hard to build up a reputation, and that's one of the main things he gave me. And lesson-wise, I don't think it's anything he ever verbalized, but that's sort of one of his unspoken lessons that I learned from him is about how to leverage positioning to its maximum versus like there's no dues to pay or ropes to learn in any market. If you want to be seen as the alpha in that position when you go into a market, you can just claim it because there's no like oversight committee that's going to be like, hey, wait a minute. You know, you didn't do your homework. You can't make those claims that you're claiming that you're the best and you know everything. No one polices that. So if you do actually have the results to back up what you're asking, you don't need anyone's permission to just get out there and say, all right, well, I'm this guy now. Yeah. So like, in my own experience, putting myself out there as a copywriter, people were like, how do you charge near A-list level prices when no one's ever heard of you? And I'm like, because I don't want to write for less than that. You know, like no one had to give me permission because I had the results and I just claimed my position with those results and I could back it up. Yeah. So that was one of the main lessons I learned from him. Another mentor in the marketing field. Let's see. I learn a lot from being in masterminds with guys that are sort of at my peer level. So one guy in my strata that I've learned a lot from how like we kind of came up together and he's like far surpassed me because he's got a mind for systems and scale is Ben Adkins. He does a lot of work in Facebook marketing, and he is just a guy I've learned a lot as friends, to where if you've made money in your business marketing this information in this way, what if you make an offer where you take that same information and present it in a different way, but you can charge a lot more? So sort of like, well, if you're writing articles about this, collect all the articles together, turn it into a multi-part course, and then charge access to that and make a lot more, add a lot more value than just publishing articles, that kind of thing. And another buddy that I would consider as like a peer / mentor is Tim Castleman. He was a speaker at one of the first marketing events I went to as a freelancer, and we became friends as we started speaking together at events. And then like last year we had an event together that we like co-headlined that we put on, and we talk practically every day about business and stuff. But what I like about Tim is he's more naturally the kind of flamboyant personality that I have to strive to be, to kind of remember to make myself entertaining and engaging and
like
provocative.
What does he do?
Like he just started his own podcast, and it's called Two Drink Tim, because he just starts drinking and talks about whatever he wants.
Right.
And then hopefully ends the podcast before he says something too terrible. Not that he's got a
kind of like mine, right?
Yeah. He's it's not that he's got a propensity to say terrible things. It's that he's very blunt and very honest, not just with other people, but also with himself. Like that event I mentioned that we co-headlined, he gave a talk that literally had a room full of grown men weeping, including himself. And then he made everybody laugh with the most vulgar joke you've ever heard. He just has this natural performance quality that, in one way, what I like about our relationship is that we're peers. So I know that he has to work to put that out there, because if we weren't friends, I would think, oh, well, I can never be like that. He's just born that way. But he struggles with it. It's just like any performer that's like, I can do it once I'm on stage, but I'm shaking with nervousness before I get on stage and start doing it. So that's one aspect that I really learned from him that I want to embody even more, is using my performance as myself as like a container for my material. Because Tim can get an audience about anything because he's entertaining himself. So he could talk about whatever he wants, and his loyal audience is going to follow him because he's just an entertaining guy.
Yeah. You said it didn't come perfectly naturally. He still had to work at it, right? But
I think, his struggle with it is it okay for me to just do that?
I see.
Because he struggles
just
more
to be
with
himself.
Well, I think he's so used to just being that guy, he doesn't necessarily realize how valuable it is by itself. You know, like he wants to make sure there's content and meaning and things that value people are going to get from it. And I'm like, Tim, it's like, you ever meet those girls that you give them a present and they unwrap the present so carefully because they think the wrapping paper is pretty? You're a pretty wrapping paper. It doesn't matter what the present is. Like, people like you because you're the container. And again, like, because of the work that I do as a consultant now, I get a lot from interacting with and watching Tim to be like, I want to be more like that and teach more people to be like that, because that honesty and courage it takes to be that honest makes it so that it really doesn't matter what he's even talking about. Yeah. It could be anything. Like, he could change businesses every 6 months and build a brand new audience that liked Tim because he's the Tim of whatever it is. Yeah. You know, he could be the Tim of Kindle books. He could be the Tim of Facebook marketing. He's just Tim, and he's a unique character that gives a unique spin to any subject. And that is super valuable. So I learn a lot about that from him.
As I blame you for this, Colin, because I respect your time and I keep trying to get to the end of the interview. Not that I want to end, because I don't, but I'm thinking each thing you tell me, I want to ask a follow-up question to. And so the obvious question is, because I want to get to your advice too. So what did he do that made people cry?
He just talked about like judging yourself against what other people that you think of as peers might be achieving. And without giving away too much, because I think he actually sells the talk and everyone should buy it. But what he said was basically he had hit a point where he found himself resenting friends that were finding faster success than him.
Yeah.
And even though they were doing it by doing things he didn't want to do himself, he was sort of mad that he wasn't advancing. Mm-hmm. And it was causing him to like burn bridges he didn't necessarily want to burn. Yeah. And he didn't know why. So he started working on himself as well as working on his business. And it was just about like his, like, I don't want to make it seem cheesy because it really wasn't, but it was about like, these are shortcomings that
like internal stuff that was going on that most people
like
think.
Yeah. It's like, these are personal shortcomings I have that I struggle with.
Yeah.
And I struggle with them to the degree where I needed to get them fixed, or else I was just going to quit this business because I couldn't stand my own reaction to things that I should have been happy for my friends being successful.
Right.
It was just making me mad because we started at the same time. Why are they so far ahead of me?
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where it was just very raw, very confessional, very honest. But he was coming from a place of like, I'm conquering that right now. So it wasn't whiny. It wasn't like feel bad for me. It was like, if you're there, I get it because I've gone through that and I'm working on it. I'm getting better. And he's doing better and better now. Like, it was almost like he was clogged for a while. And that putting it out there in front of people, exercised it, drew people to him. Yeah. And now not only has he overcome it, but he's got a much tighter audience because he connected with people a lot more deeper.
Yeah.
A lot more deeply because of that admission.
Yeah. I asked that because, you know, I think when we do become more vulnerable, we do connect with people better. And I try and do it personally, and I try and draw that out of the guests. So that's why I was wondering, not just from the, you know, the curiosity standpoint, but how I can make this better. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's definitely a vulnerability thing. And people are afraid of being vulnerable because they feel like it exposes their vulnerabilities. But what they don't realize is exposing a vulnerability is what armors it. So once you expose your own vulnerability, it's no longer a way for anyone to attack you because it's not like a secret shame. You're like, tell me something I don't know. I already admit to that and I'm working on it. What else?
Yeah. I hate to admit what pops into my mind when you say that example, but the Slim Shady fit or
8 Mile. Yeah.
8 Mile. That's what he does.
Right. That's what he does at the rap battle at the end is basically eliminates all possible objections. It's actually a marketing angle. He's like, I know what your objections are going to be in a minute. Let me go ahead and eliminate all of those so you no longer have anything to say that I haven't already said better.
Yeah.
And that's true. Like, people are afraid to be vulnerable. And I will say it's not the kind of thing where like, ooh, being vulnerable always works. There's a specific way to do it. And that's why I made a point of saying when Tim gave that talk, it was from a position of strength to where I'm already working to overcome this. Whereas if he had just like been in the midst of struggling with it without striving to get a solution, that's not a power presentation of that. You're just like breaking down on stage and being vulnerable. And that puts you in a pity position, which no one likes. Mm-hmm. So you always want to represent.
It's a fine line, yeah.
Right. You always want to represent your vulnerability and weakness from a position of already being strong because you don't care about that weakness anymore.
Right.
So it's one of those things that it's an advanced technique. I don't want anybody to think you can just go out and be like, here's everything.
You have to be genuine about it. You know, it's not like.
Yeah. You have to be genuine. And it's not just about, oh, I suck and everyone should just be okay with it because I admitted that I suck. Yeah. It needs to be like, I knew I was sucking and I was doing something about it. I'm working hard at it and I'm getting better. And I'm obviously already overcoming it because people in the audience right now think I don't suck, but I want to tell the people who do feel like they suck. You know what I mean? That's the more powerful way to present that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do it authentically and real,
Yeah.
it's very powerful and very moving and very connecting.
Yeah.
And basically from that point on, whatever it is that you're a provider of information wise,
Yeah.
the people in your audience that you connected with have no reason to go look elsewhere for it. They'll just come get it from you because they like you and they know you and they trust you because you were straight up with them about something that had nothing to do with what it is that you provide.
Right. It sort of goes into your V's in the values section too, I think. So what's your best piece of advice? What should we leave the audience with as some of your best advice for copy?
For copy?
Yeah.
I would say the number one thing to keep in mind is that the advantage of writing something in a sales letter format, which is what people mostly hired me for, that was my highest priced piece of copy that I would write for people. It needs to be from someone to someone, meaning the person who is putting the words onto that page for someone to read needs to be detectable and identifiable. Who they are matters, what's their authority, because that person is essentially making promises. No one anonymous can effectively make a promise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's backing up that promise? Who is speaking? Who, like, are they an authority on this subject? Do people believe in them? Do people trust them? That's the thing to realize, is that in addition to the product, who is making them the promises about the product matters and should be detectable.
Yeah.
The second bit that goes hand in hand with that is the letter needs to be to one person. It can't be, hey, you guys. It can't be written to many people. It needs to be from one person to one person to help them solve their one problem. And what it is when you write it that way, the person reading it can't help but feel like it's written directly to them. And when you use tricks like the one that I pointed out about, like the 3 problem facets, those things resonate more and hit home with them personally when they're in a letter that feels like it's written to just one person.
Right.
Whereas if it's written to everyone, like a big open letter to nobody in particular, those things aren't as obviously about them, and it sort of makes them read it at a distance. Whereas there's something about the way the brain works when you're reading a letter that's written from one person to one person, the reader automatically adopts that I'm an audience of one mentality. Yeah. And that's how the information comes in.
Yeah. And that's not as, it's easier said than done sometimes. It seems obvious, but I find myself doing the same thing. Like, instead of saying we, using we or their, really you have to go back and pay attention to that.
One of the reasons my process when I was writing copy, my process had a lot to do with asking questions of the personality, who the letter was going to be from, to try and figure out who they were, where they were speaking from, what their story was. And then I do the same kind of work on, I guess you would call it like a customer avatar, right, a customer identity kind of thing, because I want to know who I'm talking to. And a lot of times, the simple way I imagine it when I'm writing is I think of a specific friend that I have that we used to be very close. We lost touch after college. We're re-meeting each other, and I'm trying to explain to him what I do in a way where I'm not condescending, because he's my friend and we know each other, we're familiar, but I'm also not presuming he knows what I'm talking about. So I'm taking the time to explain in detail, because that's a big one. Is a lot of people, if you don't have someone specific in mind that you're writing this letter to, you can accidentally go into that like condescending mode, like you're talking to a child, and people can detect that. It makes your advertising seem kind of inauthentic. But if you imagine when you're writing that you're writing to someone that's a friend already, it's easy to leave that out of it. You pretend you're actually writing a letter to your friend about that topic, and I don't know, like it prevents you from going too much into like, okay, now I know you don't know what I'm talking, like there's none of that.
No explain mode type of thing. Yeah.
Right? Like, you're not dumbing it down because it's your friend, but you are still adequately explaining it because your friend doesn't quite know what you're talking about. You're just not being being a jerk about it, I guess.
Right.
But that's the biggest tip, I think, that it's one of those where if you've written a letter without that in mind, the best you can do is tweaks here and there, because at its core, it's wrong.
Yeah.
But if you start with that in mind, it's a lot easier to put tweaks into it, because at its very core, it's written correctly, which is, I'm talking to you about your problem that I want to solve. In fact, talking to you.
I feel like we're going to do like a WWF type of...
Right. It's a third-party interview. I just have this set up for when I do my own web show, so I figured I would use it.
Yeah.
But
no, I like that. Colin, establish your credibility and talk to one person, from one person to another person.
Right. And it's really something you can only effectively pull off in a sales letter format, because even though it's on a web page, people aren't like in a room full of people looking over their shoulder at what's on the screen on the web, the way like even when you're watching a TV commercial, there's other people in the room that you're watching it with, that you're sort of experiencing it with. So that one-to-one communication illusion is not as powerful. But when you have the conversation happening on a web page, that person's looking at that on a personal device, like it's got a personalized desktop, it's their phone, it's in their pocket, like it's a personal, unique advice. So that format really amplifies the way that they're experiencing that content. So it fits really well and creates that strong illusion that it's a message directly to them, particularly if it like comes in via social media or email and then they click over to read your message.
Yeah.
Because then it really did come straight to them, and then it feels like you're talking not to tons of people, but directly to them.
Right.
So it sort of creates a continuous perception of what that conversation is. And it's an illusion from our side, because we know we're talking to many people, but to them, unless they stop to think about it, or even if they do,
it's not conscious. It's not like directly conscious.
But it's one of those things that just adds a lot of context that gives you the benefit without them really thinking about what's happening. Yeah.
And Colin, so I have one last question.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you gave me till 6, I was thinking about taking the full time, but I'm not. I want you to tell people what you're working on now. Where can people find some of your stuff so they can check it out?
Sure. So it's not a very convenient URL, and I haven't made an elegant shortcut. But I've started doing a weekly web show for the Cult of Copy. That is a live YouTube hangout. Right now we're doing it at 2 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. So if you're a member of the Cult of Copy, I post there for a live Google Hangout, which gets posted to YouTube. And there's a YouTube channel for the Cult of Copy that you could subscribe. Eventually it'll be an iTunes and Android and whatever else podcast for audio. So that's like the main public outreach thing that I'm doing.
So where can they go to CultofCopy.com, which goes to the Facebook group?
Yeah, if you go to CultofCopy.com, that is a link to join the Facebook group, which you have to request to join.
So if you're in the MLM, you cannot be in the Facebook group? No, I'm just kidding.
Just don't talk about it, because if you talk about it, I'm going to make you defend it, and it's not going to go good.
Right.
But if you go to CultofCopy.com, that's currently a shortcut to the Facebook group, which you can request to join. That's sort of like my inside circle, even though there's like 7,000 people. But like I said, we're doing a web show. We're putting a podcast out there. If you don't necessarily love the topic enough to get involved in a group, I'll be putting some passive content out there. I'm working on a book that'll be out later this year. But if you like having conversations like the one that you and I have had here, ask to join the group. If your Facebook profile looks really shady, maybe private message me to let me know why you want to be in the group, because I try to keep spam at a minimum, and I do check everybody out. And if you're like super private or only share invites to games, you're probably not going to be allowed in. But there's that inside the group. I have tons of stuff, training, newsletters.
Yeah, so you have a couple, to mention some of those things, newsletters. I know you have a couple courses.
Sure. Well, what happened with the Facebook group is that it grew to like 7,000 members inside of a year. and there's so much content being posted that unless you're in there every day, you might miss some stuff. So I started a paid newsletter that I have an assistant editor who has gone through the entire archive of the group, made a note of all the good links, and we give out 4 or 5 of them every weekly or so issue, along with an original article from me that's only available in the newsletter. The idea there is, if you're a fan of the group but don't want to squat in the group constantly unless you miss something, the newsletter's a nice way.
Much more convenient.
Right. And then of the training stuff that I've done training sessions on my sales letter template, or email sequences, or
webinar promotion.
Yeah, webinar promotion, catalog copy, tons of stuff. Basically, if you go in the group, there's a post pinned to the top that has a $50 bill, because every cult member gets $50 off anything I sell automatically. And that's just sort of a list of everything I currently have available that anyone can grab if you join the group.
Right. Yeah. Fiddle.
Oh, yeah. That stands for fuck it, do it live. But that's, like I said, that goes with my product creation philosophy, which again, I'm not as disciplined as maybe people believe. So instead of trying to create a product and then sell it, I'll charge people to attend something live that doesn't exist yet, and then I'll show up and perform it and record it, and then sell the recordings later.
Yeah.
And that just works more with my personality. But if I insisted on trying to do it the way everyone else does it, which is to develop your product first and then line up affiliates and then launch it, I would still never have a product. So I just said, fuck it, do it live.
Right.
And then I show up and do it, and it works out. Everybody's happy. I make money, and it's a win-win.
Right. So my last question is this,
Sure.
Colin, people should check out CultofCopy. Who are your favorite comedians? Because you said you kind of draw some of their techniques and some things they do. And I want to know what you're drinking right now too.
I picked these up. This is a new local brewery called Jekyll Island. It's Jekyll Brewing. Jekyll Island is a coastal island on Georgia, and this is their Southern Session Blonde Ale.
Okay.
So I like to check out local breweries. This is a new one. What it is they call it a pizza pub right on the other side of this wall, and it's like a pizza parlor / bar. And so when I work in my office, I just walk over there to have lunch. But at lunchtime is when all the like the beer distributors come in to say, hey, we have this new stuff you should try. And I'm basically like always there. So they're like, see if he likes it. So they'll usually give me like a couple of bottles, and I have a little fridge back here. So I get to try lots of beers for basically being a moocher. And what was the other question?
Your favorite comedians.
Favorite comedians. So the reason I like to look at comedians is because, like I said, they have to very rapidly create rapport with the audiences through storytelling.
Yeah.
And it's the same reason I like to study con artists, because even though
they should watch your first Google Hangout session.
My first show was about a famous con artist, but it's the same concept that they're in front of an audience and they have literally seconds to make that mark feel like we're connected, right? Like, we're buddies. You're going to listen to me tell you a few stories, and then we're going to go from there. So the comedians that I like the most right now are this Australian guy, Jim Jeffries. He's got a TV show on FX called Legit that's sort of based on his stand-up, but I find his stand-up's a lot better. Like, he's just, I don't know, he's not as good of an actor as he is a performer. Yeah. But he's one of these guys that will just get up and tell you one story, and the one story might last 30 minutes. And it's hilarious all the way through, which you can see how that doesn't necessarily make you a good comedic actor. But his storytelling is amazing as far as, like, he's kind of a misanthrope, and he goes to some really dark places, but he tricks you into going there with him. So it's sort of like your buddy taking you down the dirty alley to go to the bar you shouldn't be in, kind of thing. Really like him. That's Jim Jeffries. He's got some stuff on Netflix. And then Louis C.K.
Love Louis C.K.
It's just amazing. And the thing that really sticks out to me about Louis C.K. is he gave this talk. I think you can find it online still. When George Carlin died, they did like a tribute thing and had a bunch of comedians come and like talk about him.
Yeah.
And Louis talked about how for years and years and years he had developed like his same set routine. And what he learned to do by watching Carlin is what Carlin would do is he'd spend a year touring, developing a set, and then at the end of the tour, they'd record like the last 3 shows and cut together his HBO special for that year. And then the next year he would start over from
Throw
scratch.
it out, yeah.
So every year he had a brand new, fresh, cutting set of material that had been honed for a year, so it's tight and everybody's laughing when they're supposed to. It's all been rehearsed, but it had that vitality, and like no one was putting out as much content as that guy.
It didn't get stale because he kept refreshing, yeah.
And Louis started doing that, and that's when like his shows started being a hit. That's when he had the clout to, like, he basically reinvested to where he filmed his own special and then sold it to the studios as syndicated instead of them filming it and owning it. And he made like multi-millions of dollars with the product launch. And he's not an info marketer. He just had his list of comedy buyers, and he's like, listen, I paid for this out of my pocket. And if you give me, I think it was like $5, I'll give you like the DRM free, high definition, best video quality, and you just download it. Just don't share it. Don't be a jerk. I'm not going to make you jump through.
He has some good emails. Yeah.
He does. His emails are amazing. He's like, hey, sorry for bothering you. I know you hate me. Stuff like that. But his conversation and his rawness, and then that idea that he's not anything but a performer, right? Like, his job is to get up in front of people and try and try and try and try and just churn out material. And I think to some degree that's influenced me with what I'm doing now with the show and the newsletter and the book, because I'll tell you what the plan was. I sat down to write a list of topics I wanted to do for my newsletter so I could get ahead.
Yeah.
And I ended up with a list of 13 topics that were all related. And I'm like, well, I've been wanting to write a book. That's the book. I'll just write the book chapter by chapter in the newsletter.
Yeah.
And then I knew I was going to be doing the weekly show. So I'm like, I'll automatically promote the newsletter from the show. And then it all ties together because the archive of the show will be relevant to the book and people will come and listen. And then it turns out I'm so into the topic of the book, I keep overwriting. So what's supposed to be a chapter at like 3,000 to 5,000 words, the first one I did ended up being 11,000 words.
Wow.
So I'm like, I'm going to do a paid webinar on this topic with all that extra info. And then I'm going to use that to sell in the book when the book is finally finished to say, well, I chopped this down from a much longer chapter. But if you want a whole recorded webinar about this topic, you can get it here.
Right.
So it's one of those things where once I started thinking like that lesson I learned from Louis C.K. that he learned from Carlin, where you're just constantly putting the new material out there and then capitalizing on the giant pile of stuff you've already done, that's done many wonders for my business profit-wise versus, well, what's my new thing that I need to build? And then I need to hustle and promote that one thing. Instead, you just get in the habit of churning out so much that pretty soon I'm going to have to hire an assistant to make sure I'm making all the money I could be making out of all the stuff that I just spit out regularly.
Right. Yeah. No, and you know what, Colin, this has been so much fun. I appreciate you. Everyone check out his stuff. Thank you so much for doing this.
Having me. I'm glad that we were able to meet in this context, and I'm sure we'll talk many more times in the future.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Colin. Man. I appreciate it.
Take care.